Welcome back to the PFF NFL show. I'm Trevor Sikkema. That is Ollie Connolly here with you guys to recap what we saw on Monday Night Football between the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Kansas City Chiefs, and also get into some mid-season All-Pro ballots for the offensive and defensive line. So very excited to get into that. A lot of debate here at the top. There are some fierce ones. When you only have two spots or one spot for a first team, and there's two or three guys to choose from, which we actually have a couple of instances here on this show. Man, that's it's going to be a fun debate. I'm excited to get in with Ollie and with all you guys here. Ollie, first of all, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing really good. I am enjoying now doing these Monday night recaps and getting good games. Get good games. I get to wake up with excitement and say, let's get into the football. Let's talk about Todd Bowles. So I'm doing great.
You had me until let's talk about Todd Bowles. You really did. Obviously, it was an exciting game last night. Goes to overtime in Kansas City. Don't get too many of those, but when we do, we know it is exhilarating. The Kansas City Chiefs end up winning this one in overtime. They have the first and only possession of overtime. They win this game 30-24. I think there's a lot of different things that we could talk about in this game. We can certainly get into some of the in-game decision-making that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers made down the stretch, which sort of got us to overtime, both in a good and bad way. But, Ollie, I'll go to you first. Just however you want to talk about this game. If you want to get into in-game decision-making right off the bat, we totally can. But if there was something else about this game, maybe the way that Kelsey played, either the defenses played, how the Buccaneers and Baker Mayfield played, we can get into any of that. So what really stood out to you from this Monday night game?
I think the two things kind of tied together in the, obviously we can get more into the ending game decision making from Todd Bowles, and I think what's doubly frustrating about that particular decision, do you go for 2 points at the end of the game, do you not, is how well they had coached throughout the game. I actually thought the Bucs staff wound up out coaching for the most part the Chiefs staff, particularly Bowles defensively, and I thought Liam Cohen did a brilliant job on the offensive side of the ball too, but Bowles got what he wanted from a defense that has been pretty flat for much of the year. Obviously, the Chiefs sustained a bunch of drives, and there were just kind of negative plays here and there, mostly on the plus side of the field, so it wasn't by any stretch a dominant performance, but they were able to at least generate some negatives when they needed them. He way backed off the blitz rate, right? They've been blitzing at 40-45% of the snaps much of the season. They barely sent heat last night. When they did, they were either crushed over the head themselves or they generated a couple of sacks, which is kind of the trade-off Bowles was looking for. So he got out of his team defensively as much as he probably could have expected with how it's been over recent weeks. So when you take the fact that you probably outperformed your expectations going into the night to then kind of lay an egg as the head coach rather than the defensive mind by not putting the faith in an offense that has played really well over 2 weeks despite losing the receivers, it just to me speaks to the whole ballsness of it all, where every single decision in his mind is, I can figure it out with my defense, even if the kind of evidence isn't there for you over the course of the season.
Yeah, and I think it's one, I want to give the Kansas City Chiefs certainly the credit. It's another vintage Kansas City Chiefs game, right, where Seth Galina, our coworker here at PFF, he keeps saying this, and it's so true. If the Chiefs ever need 3, they get 4. If they need 10, they get 11. If they need 15, they get 16. It's just the way that the Kansas City Chiefs are. And so you can even expand that to, do you need to win a game 13-10? They can do so. Do you need to win a game 24-23? They can do so. Do you need to win a game 45-48? They can do so. They can just be whatever they need to be really at any point in time. And so I don't want to take anything away from this team that was able to claw back, was down on the scoreboard, ends up winning this game in overtime. Certainly those last 2 scoring drives by the Chiefs were methodical. They took a ton of time. They were over 10 plays each. And so they were able to play well enough down the stretch to win this football game, and they showed the identity of a championship caliber team. There's no doubt about it. But on the other side of things, you're right, it is very frustrating because on one hand, you look at what the Buccaneers did. No Chris Godwin, no Mike Evans. They're still able, the run game was barely working at all on Monday night. And yet, they're still able to move the ball well enough. Baker Mayfield's able to make a handful of throws, especially down the stretch when it really came to them getting a scoring position at the end of the game and even tying it up there with their final drive. And you want to give them credit there. And then I think the defense, too, you mentioned from a defensive side of things, they were confusing the Chiefs' offense. It didn't look as easy. Now, they're going through some injuries as well. They're trying to kind of figure some things out. But still, Bowles from the defensive side of things for like 3/4 of that game actually held the Chiefs offense in check, and it gave them a chance to be there when the game was over. Certainly they were up 17-10 in the second half, but it is that last decision that a lot of people are going to talk about. And is that totally fair on Bowles? No, and that's why I wanted to make sure I said I was impressed with how well they were able to at least get the Chiefs off their game a little bit. And that's really all you could hope for. Just make them get off their game a little bit. And Mahomes hit some incredible throws last night. And of course, was the defense perfect? No. But they're going through injuries too. And I felt like they set themselves up in a spot, to Ollie, where they could have won this game, stole this game in Kansas City. Because if the Bucs win that game last night, they've got the two best wins in the NFL, right? In Detroit, in Kansas City. And so to even be in a position like that is commendable, and I think it shows a job well done. The problem is they got themselves into that position. They tied the game. They had, I should say, they scored the touchdown and had the opportunity to either tie the game or potentially go for two and maybe even win it in regulation. And Todd Bowles chose not to do that. Now, if you want to say that the logic there is we would rather let the game play out, we would rather let a lot of things happen as opposed to put it on the chance of one play, okay, I can see that logic. I don't agree with it. But the logic after the game that Todd Bowles said was, well, the weather conditions and the ball was wet and we didn't want to go for it. It's like, you just scored. You just marched down the field to score with a wet ball. What do you, it's not like the ball was dry and then it was wet. I don't know. I didn't see the full quote from it, but I did see that snippet. I didn't love that explanation, especially because, Ollie, I'm trying not to be revisionist history. I'm trying not to be the hindsight guy. But even in the moment, you've got to think about it like this. You did all the work to get to that opportunity to where one play could steal you this game, and you didn't take it. 4th and 2, you've got Liam Cohen and Baker Mayfield who just drove down the field and scored. Do you want to put the ball in their hands for one do-or-die play, or do you want to give the ball back to Mahomes at least once with 20 seconds left, and we've seen what he's able to do with less than 20 seconds before to get into field goal range, then put your faith in the flip of a coin, then have to watch Mahomes potentially have the ball in overtime, and you didn't even get it back, just like you did against Atlanta 4 weeks ago. And Bowles chose that one, and it didn't work out for him. You are putting the ball in Patrick Mahomes' hands. That's what you were doing when you make that call. And I can never agree with doing that. And that's what the Bucs opted to do, and that's where we got. So I sort of ushered it into this conversation. You knew it wasn't going to be long before we got into it, but what did you think overall of that endgame sequence?
No, I agree with you. And even look, we gave Bowles some credit for being able to kind of mix things up and break against this type this season to maybe confound the Chiefs, particularly on early downs. Mahomes roasted them on 3rd down to most of the game. So they didn't get fortunate. They played well and tightened up when they needed to, right? When they're on the plus side of the field, when the Chiefs were. But to expect that just to hold for the overtime drive, it was asking an awful lot when defensively just haven't been that great all season long. And for it to be the second time in one season when you lose in overtime without possessing the ball is just so tough for them to take. And I'm with you. You get one play to win the thing. And what bothers me with Bowles is not necessarily always the decisions. There are decisions that coaches make, plenty of them that I disagree with. Mike Tomlin makes a bunch that just don't stack up to me. But his logic and reasoning, when I hear him explain it, I can kind of go, okay, I see his point of view. We just kind of slightly disagree on the outcome there. With Bowles, where I get frustrated, as you mentioned, is the reasoning just doesn't really stack up to scrutiny. Saying that the weather turns the ball's difficult to grip, you can just flip it the other way and say, okay, we'll take our chance even if we miss it. Right? Well, that still means that the ball is slippy and wet and it's tough conditions for Harrison Butker to hit a game-winning field goal. Or, as actually happened on the drive, they had 2 chances to go and pick the ball off to go and take the game, right? That could have happened with you having a lead. That could have happened with you being 1 down or whatever. So the reasoning and the logic to me is just off. If you go into Arrowhead and you have a good enough performance to give yourself a chance to win without your 2 top receivers, with a defense that's been fried for much of the season, and you get one play to win the thing, what has been our best unit this season? It is the offensive line, it's Baker Mayfield, it's Liam Cohen. Let's go give the ball to them rather than, as you said, putting our secondary against Patrick Mahomes. It just doesn't make any sense to me.
It's one of those things where I feel like you're just stacking things against you. And I tweeted this last night because unfortunately we've seen it too many times with Todd Bowles, whether when it comes to 3rd and 4th down decisions or end game decisions and things like that. the game of football, especially at the professional level, is truly, it's a game of inches. It is the smallest margins that end up winning you football games. And it feels as though the Bucs start behind the eight ball before the game even begins because of the way that they sort of approach these decisions. And you just see coaches that are much more open to going for these sort of non-traditional, I guess I will say, decisions on third down and fourth down, and whether you're kicking or whether you're going for two or whatever you're doing at different sides of the field. Bowles is just not aggressive in that manner. And I think the area that I keep coming back to is this. Why would you want the ball in Patrick Mahomes' hands? Why wouldn't you want it in your own hands? Why would you not want the ball in Baker Mayfield's hands and Liam Cohen's hands, right? That's always the thing is when you opt to make that decision, you are relinquishing the ball. You are relinquishing control of the game. And you are instead putting it in the hands of not just any quarterback, which the modern NFL football game is now designed for quarterbacks to have an easier time pushing the ball deep down the field, getting into field goal range, because that's entertaining, right? We've seen the rule book change. We've seen tendencies change, all this kind of stuff. It is easier for quarterbacks to do that than ever. And not only that, you are doing so with one of the greatest of all time in his prime, at home, undefeated, going for a three-peat. And so you want to put the ball in that guy's hands. And Ollie, it dawned on me last night because I've thought about this before. Bowles' thought process of, quote unquote, the ball in my hand is his defense on the field. Yes. And that's just not how the Buccaneers are built. Maybe at some point in time it was, but it's not anymore. Even when you are down Chris Godwin and Mike Evans, the strength of this team is the offense. It's Baker Mayfield. It's Liam Cohen. That is where the ball should be, and he chose to take the ball out of those guys' hands and put it in the hands of his defense, which had been getting torched on third down all night, had been giving up over just about 100 yards to Travis Kelce on a ton of different targets because the linebackers couldn't cover. You got secondary issues with Josh Hayes all night, and it's just very frustrating in that regard when I kind of thought about it like that. It's like, man, he's not taking the ball out of his hands. He genuinely believes it's in his hands when that version of the Bucs defense is on the field, and that's the part that I cannot agree with. So, any more thoughts on that, or just any more thoughts on the game in general? Are we worried at all about the Kansas City Chiefs? Was kind of like how much they were struggling a little bit in the early parts of the game. I know they're incredible on third down, so maybe that just makes up for it. But any other closing thoughts here on Monday Night Football?
The closing one for me would just be DeAndre Hopkins' impact, right? They go and make this trade that the league should never have allowed them to do. Somehow they've been able to get DeAndre Hopkins. And what I think is so interesting about bringing him in is they haven't done anything to kind of change the offense in a way that's like, we have DeAndre Hopkins, either as them, I don't know, misidentifying that, he's 6 years younger than he is, still at the peak of his powers, anything like that, or just to kind of bring him along slowly and work in a kind of package of DeAndre plays. He's just in the offense in a traditional Chiefs spot and is then open. And they used him an awful lot last night he was kind of the target guy in RPO situations and now screens and really quick things from Mahomes where it's just a really simple leverage, read and let it rip. And they already have this really nice chemistry on just the quick in-breaking things. We see with the touchdown where everyone's terrified of DeAndre Hopkins jumping over them, right, for the fade stuff, which he's done all throughout his career. He's able to just stutter on a young player and get the simple slant for the touchdown. But all night, it just felt, when you go back through the film in the morning, he is open a ton on quick breaking things. So to be able to have that as a quick breaking target, then you have Kelce at the intermediate part of the field, as you mentioned, the Bucs linebackers just couldn't cover him all night. And then they're hoping at some point, maybe they can get through Watson or Worthy or someone, that kind of third level down the field, which has been missing for them all season. They hit 6 explosive plays last night. They should have had another one. Worthy drop what should have been probably a walk-in touchdown. Was that the opening drive of the game? Maybe the second drive of the game?
Yeah, that was that first drive, yeah.
Yeah, you can see where dropping Hopkins in already, even if he's never the player he was at the peak of his powers, how it just fits into the puzzle so seamlessly right away. And it shouldn't be that shocking that a great player in DeAndre Hopkins, maybe the greatest ever in Mahomes, have chemistry right away. But it is really neat right away without having to do any kind of gimmickry, right, to try and force him the ball. Oh, he didn't have many touches in the first week. He was there, let's try and force feed him in the second week. It was not that in the slightest. It was just, we run our offense, he's in this spot, and he's open, so we triggered to it. And so I think that's really important to just kind of track and note moving forward. forward.
All right, we're going to get into our midseason All-Pro ballots for the offensive and defensive lines, but we do have some trade deadline news that we have to hit on. Before we get into that, though, this show is sponsored by our friends over at BetterHelp. Think of a time recently when you felt like maybe you couldn't be yourself. You were wearing a mask, a costume, something like that. We just got done with Halloween. It's a great time for masks and costumes when you're doing stuff like that and celebrating, but you never want to do that at home with your family, in workspaces, in social settings, things like that. You want to be able to be your full self, right? Therapy can help you learn to accept all parts of yourself so you could take off the costume, take off the mask. Masks, they're for Halloween, not for the emotions, right? I've been doing therapy for over a year and a half, and I've really enjoyed it. It has been exactly that for me. It has allowed me to sort of discover how my mind works and the processes and how I come to decisions, the things that I like about myself, the things that I don't. And it allows me to really focus on those things that I do well, and the things that I don't, I'm working on. I'm getting better at it. And it really does. It makes me much more confident to be exactly who I am. Not that I'm perfect, but it allows you to be comfortable with who you are and where you're going and the person that you're going to be. Therapy is a useful tool to have a better understanding of how that mind actually works, your own patterns and behaviors, how to improve them. It's useful for everybody, not just struggling with something specific, although it can be good for that as well. If you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. BetterHelp is convenient, it's flexible. It's an entirely online way to get therapy that is right for you. You just fill out a brief questionnaire, get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. You can take off the mask with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/PFF to get 10% off your first month. That is BetterHelp, HELP.com/PFF. All right, the trade deadline news that I want to talk about that is topical for this show, for this program, is Za'Darius Smith going from the Cleveland Browns to the Detroit Lions. Now, not a heavy compensation package right here. Za'Darius Smith for a 2026 7th-round pick to Detroit, and then they're getting back a 2025 5th-round pick, and then a 2026 6th-round pick. So Za'Darius Smith and a 2026 7th going for basically a 5th-round pick this year and a 6th-round pick next year. So, Ollie, not a lot, right? And it's not a lot. When these veterans are at the deadline, it just feels like you can get them for pretty dang cheap most of the time. And here we are. We've talked about this for the Lions over the last couple of weeks, being in the running to go out and get a pass rusher. Now, this is a team that I love what the Lions are doing, right? Because they're coming off big wins. They're not sitting here waiting for okay, because the Lions could have been a team that says, all right, well, let's wait. Let's go into Green Bay. Let's see how we play in Green Bay. And if we can't win in Green Bay, then we'll get really aggressive at the trade deadline. No. They went in and they won in Green Bay. And then they said, okay, it doesn't matter. Let's just try to get better. Let's try to keep stacking this roster as best we can. So some thoughts on Za'Darius Smith going to the Detroit Lions. What do you got?
Yeah, I love the way you frame that, right? Because you cannot be the raw, aggressive team, the aggressive staff asking for the buy-in from players, and then kind of wuss out when you get to the trade deadline. If you think there's someone missing, right? The locker room can smell it out. And so you're just stacking on top we are all in. We believe we can win it this year. And we're going to be as aggressive as possible, looking to try and find a way to replicate in any way we can the loss of Aiden Hutchinson. And I think Za'Darius Smith looked to open the season. I was pretty concerned that we were seeing if not a stark decline, a pretty significant one. I thought the first 4 weeks of the season, it didn't quite look that smooth. He didn't have much pop off the ball. The power moves weren't quite as relentless as they have been in the past. And then from about week 5 onwards, when he's faced probably better competition than he even did in those opening weeks, he started to come back online. And still some of his production, if you just go by some of the metrics, is concentrated in a few weeks, which may give you some pause. But I just love the idea of getting a veteran presence in there, someone who wins in a pretty specific way, but you can just kind of lock that in and say, if we give him 30 reps a game, he's probably going to get us 5-6 wins a week, and that's more than they have right now in terms of like reliability and production. And maybe, as we get close to the postseason, someone with that kind of veteran savvy, that could even tick up as we move along. So I just think for such a buy low situation, it's an excellent move from them. And Smith, after having the slow start, has really come on this season.
Yeah, over the last 3 weeks, specifically weeks 7, 8, and 9, total pressure, 6, 9, 3. Passers win percentage, 21.1, 23.5, 22.7. I mean, anytime you're hovering right around those low 20 percentile, especially for a 3-week stretch, you're doing pretty good as a pass rusher. And of course, there's some opportunities where the volume is heavier than others. And obviously the matchup of who you're going up against, the offensive tackles matters. They played the Bengals, the Ravens, the Chargers, and the Chargers specifically, I think having a 22.7 pass rush win percentage, even though the pressures was lower and the opportunities were lower still, those two good offensive tackles that you're going up against. And Smith is one of those players that's sort of uniquely built, right? He's 6'4", he's 275 pounds. The Cleveland Browns have not been afraid to use him in all different areas, right? They'll use him as a stand-up linebacker and a mug look, right in front of the nose tackle. They'll use him all the way as a 7 technique, as a stand-up guy. And so he, to me, really helps just improve the customization of what you want to do on that defensive line. You're right, it's not as streamlined of a role as sort of what Hutchinson was doing for you and the impact that he was having there, but I love the way that you said it. Anytime that you are a contending team and you get the chance to add a veteran player that is still playing at a decently high level, that knows what he's doing, obviously going to play with his hair on fire to try to win a championship here, I think it's a great move. Great move for Detroit. Specifically, you talk about the return. Za'Darius Smith and a 2026 7th for a 5th and a 6th? Come on. I mean, like, you're going for a Super Bowl here. To me, that's worth it every time. So I agree. I think that this was a very good move here by the Detroit Lions to make this one happen. If you don't have any other Za'Darius Smith thoughts or like Cleveland thoughts, anything like that, we can head into the midseason All-Pro ballot. You want to just jump into that?
Yeah, let's do the Pro Bowl teams.
All right, let's do it. All right, so we are doing our midseason All-Pro ballots here. Okay, so the way that this is set up is there will be 2 defensive tackles on the first team, 2 defensive tackles on the second team, 2 edge rushers on the first team, 2 edge rushers on the second team. Then we'll flip over to offensive line. Ollie, I don't know if you left it just sort of like guard and tackle sort of in the same format. I switched it and I got a little bit more specific. I went like left tackle, first team, second team, right tackle, first team, second team, same with guards, and then center. Did you have it segmented like that, or was yours just more general, recognizing offensive tackles and guards?
Yeah, on the offensive side, I went specifically, the players are not moving around on the offensive line, so I went specifically with where they're lined up for the offense.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. So we'll start with defensive line, though. I think that's the area that I want to start out with because there's a good debate. I'm going to put us on the spot to start this thing. Let's do interior defensive line. So defensive tackles here. We have 2 first-team spots for 3 all-world aliens, and we have to make a decision of who we are going to leave out and have in that second tier. I will ask you first as the guest of the show here, who do you have as your first-team defensive tackle duo midway through the season?
My duo is Dexter Lawrence and Cam Hayward.
Oh, that's what I got too. Same thing.
And I just want to point out for people on Dexter Lawrence specifically that I can't think. I was trying to play around this morning and look around and go, am I misremembering someone who's rushed the passer as a true nose at the level he's rushing at, which is similar figure, similar benchmarks to being like a truly elite edge rusher or, a classic 3-tech Sap, Donald, someone like that. He is rushing an awful lot from a congested situation where he's head up or just slightly off from the center and he's got a guard right there. And everyone in the world knows, for as good as the edge defenders have been at times up and down for the Giants this season, that we're going to have to double this guy off the ball. And he is just obliterating people every single week. And the thing that stands out with him even more when you dig through kind of the wider parameters of what's happening is there is no player right now, for as much is allocated to some of the great edge defenders in the league, who is just kind of completely stripping down the offensive operation off the ball as consistently. Whether it's just kind of blowing past someone, so then you mess up where a sweep or an end around or something that kind of moves in the backfield. He is just over and over again disrupting every single thing an offense wants to do, even if he isn't actually the guy who winds up getting the pressure or the hit or the TFL, whatever it is that would actually count up in the stats. He's kind of got this extra thing going on where so much attention is paid to him, and even with the attention, he's just destroying everything an offense is trying to do operationally every week.
Yeah, I have these 2 guys the same because they're a little bit more well-rounded than the third player, which is Chris Jones, which is who we're going to talk about sort of next as we talk about the second team guys. But yeah, I mean, when you look at Cam Hayward and Dexter Lawrence, their numbers are so high for both run defense and pass rushing categories. Cam Hayward, 89.7 pass rush grade. That's second in the league. Sacks, he's tied for 14th. Pressures, 6th. Win percentage, first. Run defense grade, first. This is among defensive tackles, by the way. Solo stops in the run game, second. So, I mean, this guy is basically top 5 in every single category, pass rushing and run defending when it comes to Cam Hayward. And then Dexter Lawrence, pass rush grade, 83.7. That's 4th in the NFL. Sacks, he's 1st. Pressures, he's 3rd. Win percentage, he's 11th, so a little bit lower. Run defense grade, he's 2nd. Solo stops, he's got 10. That's 22nd. So to me, Dexter Lawrence is also in that spot where, like Hayward, he is just affecting the game at such a high level in both areas. If I had to choose a 1 and a 2, I would go with Cam Hayward as the number 1 guy right now. But Lawrence is right there because his floor is so high. I mean, his impact on all 3 downs is felt every single week. I mean, I know he struggled a little bit this past week, but he is such a high impact player. And you mentioned somebody who is aligned in a unique spot where he's able to have that sort of impact. And I think that that's really important. So I have those 2 guys as my first team players. And then my second team players, I made you go first, so I'll go second here for the second team. Chris Jones is the obvious one for defensive tackle. If you're not going to put him on the first team, you got to put him next on the second team, because I think there is certainly a debate for him to be a first team All-Pro midway through the season, because 91.1 pass rush grade for defensive tackles, that's 1st. For sacks, he's tied for 14th. Pressures, he's 2nd. Win percentage, he's 2nd. But then you get into some run defense stuff. 62.5 run defense grade, that's 45th of defensive tackles, and then 8 solo stops, that's 40th. So he's just not the run defender that those other guys are. Now, I'm not saying that to take anything away from Chris Jones. It's just those other 2 guys are doing a little bit more in the run game, and so I think that they deserve the nod with Chris Jones kind of getting that second team honor here. The next player, there's a lot of different guys that I think you could go with. Ultimately, I did go with Jalen Carter, because I still think that Carter is, what he does as a pass rusher is still so highly impactful, and his talent is so evident every single time that they play, that his high pass rush grade, I believe he's got just south of a 90.0 pass rushing grade on the season. To me, that was too much to sort of pass up. There are a couple of guys that have a little bit higher floors. Zach Allen I thought about here, but he's a big volume guy. Like, he's played over 540 snaps this season, which is crazy. No other defensive tackle has played over, I think, 470. So he's an Iron Man on the defensive line. I want to give him recognition, but with all that volume, the stats and the effectiveness, I think, has been a little bit lower outside of those splash plays with how much he has played. So I thought about Zach Allen here. Quinnen's sort of coming along a little bit, but I didn't think of him too much. I think Jalen is probably just that next guy that I would go to, because there's some other studs, but like, DeForest Buckner's missed some time. Vita Vea's missed some time. Those are guys who maybe if they would have played the full the full early part of the season, I could have considered them there. But ultimately, I went with Jalen Carter to pair with Chris Jones. Who did you have on your second team for defensive tackle?
I went with Allen. I think your Carter point is probably the correct one. If you were just picking one player to start for your team, or one rep for your life, you would go with Jalen Carter, because I do think he can win in a number of different ways, and you can do different things with your front just because of how dominant he is. With Allen, I give him credit for having, the stats have been juiced slightly, as you mentioned, because he's playing so many snaps, but he is playing those snaps. So it's basically playing a full more game than everyone else in the league, perhaps 2 based on how you rotate your defensive front. So I give him credit for that. And I just think when you watch them, they get an awful lot of credit just as a collective, right? Because they do so many different things, and it just doesn't feel like there's many stars in that defense when you go through. There's a bunch of undrafted linebackers, safeties from all over the place. They've rolled through all these different edge defenders, but they really tee everything they do off, particularly in the run game, where he's not a very good run defender. It really is boom or bust. But they do ask him within that to just kind of let it fly every single rep and to just drive downhill, throw his body into things to create voids for other people. So I do think he's doing what's asked of him, even though he doesn't actually stand up and get off things as well as you would maybe like to see, as well as Jalen Carter does. And I'm just going to give him a slight bit of extra credit for just the sheer volume of forced negative plays, all the run stops, the TFLs, the production in pass rush win rate, all the different pressures this season, and then doing so as kind of the focal point of one of the best defenses in the league that we just didn't think would necessarily be that high up there to begin the season. So I'm giving it more of a cap tip for doing it at such a high volume over and over again.
I think Calais Campbell, I think, is playing well for the Miami Dolphins. He's somebody that I sort of considered. Poona Ford is actually playing really well on that Chargers defensive line as well, so I kind of thought about him, not necessarily to the level of picking him over as Zach Allen, but somebody that I sort of wanted to shout out for those 2 guys. Not really considered given the players that we have for second team here, but players who are having a good year that I wanted to recognize there. Let's move on to edge rusher next. My first team edge rusher, I have TJ Watt as one of the spots, and then I have Trey Hendrickson as the other. Now, I think that there are a handful of choices that you could go with here at edge rusher. Ultimately, I go with TJ Watt because I think it's better. It's been a better year for him in run defense. Obviously, I think that he is a good pass runner, but he has been a damn near elite run defender this season. Pass rush has been better than it was, I think, over the last couple of seasons. But the forced fumbles, too, man. I mean, leading the league in forced fumbles is huge. I don't think that's as much of luck, certainly when you have as many as TJ Watt does. He's got 4 this season. Sometimes you could say, like, all right, well, I'm just, I'm hitting a guy a certain way. He didn't have the ball really secured. It's sort of a lucky forced fumble. I don't think that TJ Watt has a lot of, like, lucky forced fumbles. He is the one who is hitting you a certain way. He trains a certain way. He's always going for the ball. So I give him credit for a lot of the forced fumbles that he has. So that's a major game-changing part of the game. It's not just, as if a sack wasn't impactful enough. He can get those strip sacks and change everything for you. He's already been doing that midway through the year. So I think TJ Watt is going to be on this list. And then Trey Hendrickson leads the NFL in sacks, had 4 more sacks this past week. And the thing that impresses me the most about Hendrickson, who maybe there are a couple of players that their pass rush win percentage is a little bit higher, maybe the pressure numbers a little bit higher, or even like the run defense grade might be a little bit higher. With Hendrickson, I have to think about what the Bengals were through the first, I would say, 4 to 5 weeks of the season, where it was literally just him. Like that was it. And nobody else in the defensive line was really stepping up. It was just him. And I don't say that just to say this is why he had the volume stats. I say that his extremely high-level impact was not only important, but like demanded. If the Bengals were going to stay in games at all whatsoever in the earlier parts of the season, I think how he was able to be the presence on that defense through the first 4 to 5 weeks sort of reminded this team of like what they could be, and they have since followed suit. And I think the Bengals are a much better version of themselves, certainly on the defensive side of the ball now than they were to start the season. I think Hendrickson's motor and production and takeover ability is a big reason why. So some X factors kind of played into this one with him over a couple of guys, but ultimately I got TJ Watt and Trey Hendrickson as my 2 All-Pros midway through the season. What about you?
Yeah, I love the Hendrickson pick. I've got TJ Watt as well, and I think the point you made is really interesting. He might be one of the most fascinating like player development guys we've had in a long time in the league, and partly I think this is to do with the fact he plays in a stacked defensive line, right? So he's got Hayward there, there's Herbig, there's Highsmith, but him just deciding at this point of his career that I have one move and I'm going to hit it every single time. And so when you go and dig through some of the figures or you watch every game, you'll say, hey, his pass rush win rate doesn't stack up with the elite guys. His pressure numbers per snap are not always up there with the elite guys. But what he's decided to do by just being a pure dip and rip around the arc, maybe 2 or 3 different moves over the course of a game, but it's just one go-to thing. First step quickness, dip under, and try and explode back to the quarterback. And he knows if I can hit that 3 or 4 times, those are quick wins. And they're not just quick wins, 2.5 seconds. They are immediately at the snap wins, which allows me then to attack the ball. So to your point that you don't think they're lucky, I don't think they're lucky at all. I think it's a design thing where he said, I'd rather make game-changing plays that win football games than have the highest pressure rate in the league, where maybe I'm getting unbelievable stat lines, but not necessarily deciding games on my own along the defensive line. So I have TJ Watt in there for the same reason that you said, that just the volume of game-changing plays, while maybe not the down-to-down impact of some of the other guys, when he does get home, he closes in a different way to everyone else in the league. So I have him first. And then the rest of it is so difficult. I think the Hendrickson points you made were really good. You can go with Garrett, Bosa, Jonathan Greenard is having an unbelievable season, but I think he gets a bit more scheme help than everyone else. Hutchinson, I know, has been injured and missed 3 weeks, but his numbers are still as good or better than anyone, and he's missed 3 weeks of the year, so that's wild. And then I think Khalil Mack deserves a shout out too, because the Chargers have become the best run defense in the NFL, and it's been a real collective effort, but he's been by far their best on the ball defensive lineman, playing truly as like an in-line heavy end at this stage in his career and still offering some juice as a pass rusher as well. So I wanted to give Khalil Mack a shout out for that. I am going back and forth on who to pick here, but you kind of convinced me with the Hendrickson point that I think he's probably had more subtle down weeks than some of the other contenders that I talked about there, but what he's had to overcome with what is around him, he's working with such a subpar group and has done for much of the season compared to everyone else. So for him to be having kind of drive-changing, game impact type plays regularly, and then have kind of the underlying win rate production where he is just winning one-on-one all the time, and some of the pressure totals as well. I think I'm going to have to agree with you and go with Trey Hendrickson.
Well, for my second team, you mentioned that you wanted to give Khalil Mack a shout out. I'm gonna give Khalil Mack the nod, and the two players that I have here on the second team for edge rushers. One is Myles Garrett. I cannot keep him off of this list. He has a 26.3% pass rush win percentage this season. It's stupid. So even if you want to say, all right, well, Myles Garrett hasn't quite been the run defender that some of these other edge rushers have, that's fine. He has been the pass rusher. The only pass rusher at the edge spot that has a higher pass rushing grade and higher pass rush win percentage than Myles Garrett is Aiden Hutchinson, who obviously would be in this list had he not been hurt. I mean, if you wanted to say midway through the season that you're giving one of these to Aiden Hutchinson, you absolutely could, and I wouldn't really fault you for it. Obviously, with him not playing the rest of the season, he's not going to win it in the end, but certainly the nod there at how he has been playing. Myles Garrett is the next guy, and he is playing at an insane level as well. So if Hendrickson wasn't in the picture this year, we'd be talking about Myles Garrett as a defensive player of the year once again because of what he is doing as a pass rusher. So I think he has to be here at one of these second team All-Pro spots. And then I'll give Khalil Mack the next one because elite 92.1 run defense grade already this season. You talked about what the Chargers defensive line has been this year. And I mentioned Poona Ford is somebody who is a shout-out type of a player for the defensive line, but so is Khalil Mack. Ageless in how he is able to anchor and defend the run, set the edge. So he is still good as a pass rusher, 14.3 pass rush win percentage, but it's really what the elite run defender that Khalil Mack has been this year, which is what they are asking him to do primarily along that defensive line. That tells me, hey, you're not only doing the job that they're asking you to do, you are doing it well, and you're giving him a little bit of that extra with how you are pass rushing, even over the age of 30, which we don't see a lot from these edge rushers, even the most talented ones. So to me, I think TJ Watt, Trey Hendrickson get that first team, those two first team spots, and then I have Myles Garrett and Khalil Mack getting the second team All-Pro spots here. What about you?
Yeah, I'm going to give Myles Garrett for all the reasons you mentioned. I feel like I've almost maybe given him a slight demerit because I'm just used to it being so outrageously superhuman that when he is simply just all-time great for 8 weeks, I'm like, well, maybe I knock him down and put Trey Hendrickson above him. I mean, he's been flat out unblockable multiple weeks this season. So I definitely have Garrett on there. And I think I'll give the nod slightly to Bosa ahead of Mack. I think Mack has probably been more consistent on a week-to-week basis. And I do think he's been dinged slightly, as you mentioned. Some of the alignments they use him in, if they just shuffled him away from the formation more, they'd make their team worse and they'd probably boost his individual figures for the season. But he's playing, as you mentioned, the role that he's asked to play at the highest possible level while still giving you plenty of sizzle as a pass rusher when it's demanded and it's obvious pass rush downs. But I just think Bosa, for raw production, his run defense ticking up ever so slightly when it's not always been the strongest element of his game for a group that's not been the strongest for multiple seasons now. I'm going to lean ever so slightly towards Bosa.
All right, let's flip over to the offensive line now. Now, like we said, it's a little bit more segmented here in how we're doing this. It's not just two offensive tackles, and they could both be left tackles. Like, we're making ourselves choose here. You got to have an all-pro first team and second team left tackle, and then a right tackle, a right guard, and a left guard as well. So we'll start with left tackle here, which I think there have been some really good left tackles in the league this year. This was tough. Ultimately, because I only get to choose one for the first team, I went with Teron Armstead as the first team player here. He has been awesome this year when he has certainly been out there. And it's just, I think a lot of people look at the Miami Dolphins and they go, man, why are they still hanging on Teron Armstead? He's getting older now. He's injury prone. He's going through a bunch of injuries. Like they need to move on from him. It's because when this guy's out there and he's playing, he is one of the best offensive linemen in the NFL still, and we see it this year. 8.5% impact run blocking. It's 18.5% impact run blocking, which is how often you are given a positively graded play in run blocking, and then defeated run blocking percentage means how often you are given a negative play. He is 10.5% this season. So that's a pretty good ratio, honestly. Like offensive line play, it's very ebbs and flows. You have your wins, you have your losses. And 18% is actually pretty dang high for an impact run blocking rate, and only 10% negative. that's also pretty good. So the floor is high and the ceiling is high when it comes to his impact as a run blocker. And then when you look at pass blocking, just a 2.8 pressure percentage all season as a pass blocker. So no matter how much you play, whether it's a lot or a little, pressure percentage is sort of what we look at to see how much you are giving pressures per the amount of snaps that you are playing. And he has one of the lowest of those top guys that we look at this season. So Teron Armstead, to me, Ollie, is the first team guy just because of how good he has been both as a run blocker and a pass blocker at elite levels this year.
Yeah, and it's remarkable just how well he still moves, given all the injuries, the age that you mentioned. The thing with Armstead, I think, if you were going to make this team and if you plumped for him over some of the other top candidates, Slater, Williams, Darisaw, Wirfs, the matchups he's faced is a complete gauntlet just going on down the line. Whether it's in the run game with a different kind of front, whether it's just one-on-one, the pass rushing game, he's faced Josh Hines-Allen, Leatu Latu, Greg Rousseau, Ed Oliver, Keon White. Like, he has faced all different kinds of rushers who aren't always the steadiest. Some of those guys are pretty volatile, but there's plenty of talent in that list. So he has faced, a whole bunch of really, really talented pass rushers and basically locked everyone down.
So do you have him as your first team guy as well?
I do not, but I was trying to make the argument for you, Trev. So
okay, all right. Well, thank you. I appreciate the help. That was a nice little lob there. I will take it. But who is your first team guy then at left tackle?
I've gone with Tristan Wirfs. For a similar thing with the matchup thing, obviously, I don't think anyone would argue. He's got a 1.8% pressure rate conceded this year,
Crazy,
which is just,
man.
It doesn't even make any sense when I look at it. I'm like triple tape, looking through, going like, this can't be right. Is this isolated to 2 weeks? Nope. This is a full season. He's dominating everyone. Run grade is slightly down a little bit, but he still makes crucial impact plays the run game where he is the featured guy, the same way someone like a Penny Sewell would be for the Lions. And the only person who's given him any semblance of trouble all season is Aiden Hutchinson, who was, the best player in the league for 6 weeks or so before he got injured. And then a really odd sort of match against Clelin Ferrell, who gave him a couple of sticky points over 4 or 5 reps. But other than that, he has just shut down everyone all season.
I agree, man. I thought now Jordan Mailata I think deserves a shout out, but obviously like his snaps are a little bit lower with him getting injured. I think Charles Cross has played well as well, so you could kind of look at which Charles Cross is kind of funny because we thought that he was just going to be a pass rush specialist. He was really going to struggle in the run game, but now it's a little bit different. Like he's blocking really well in the run game, and actually the pass blocking is a little bit lower this year, although he is bouncing back. So I think that at the end of the year, perhaps we could be giving this to Charles Cross, but ultimately, this second team spot at left tackle came down to Tristan Wirfs and Rashawn Slater for me, who I think Rashawn is also playing very well. Missed a little bit of time, but I think he is playing well. I think Tristan Wirfs deserves it because of what you said. Like the run blocking is down a little bit, but you could still see the flashes of really great plays in the run blocking. It just hasn't been as consistent as it's been in years past. And a 1.6% pressure percentage. I mean, that's just stupid. You have a wall at left tackle that you do not have to worry about no matter who you are going up against. I know you mentioned Aiden Hutchinson gave him fits, but Aiden Hutchinson was the overall NFL player of the year when he was playing, and just the incredible hot streak that he was on. And outside of that, it's just been stellar from Hutchinson. So I went back and forth. I thought long and hard about this one. This is tough. I lost sleep over it between Rashawn Slater and Tristan Wirfs, but ultimately I do think Tristan Wirfs deserves a nod for how well he is pass protected. So who is your second team guy?
Armstead was my second team pick. I really went back and forth. I still think Trent Williams is having an unbelievable season. I know the pressures are up this year. When you dig through some of them, there aren't as many clean defeats as you may think when you just kind of see the stat line. But I just think for all around Armstead versus some of the competition he's faced, the different looks he's faced, the fact that it's like chaos all around him for much of the season, plus the quarterback situation, right? So you think there'll be ballooning figures because guys are holding onto the ball too long. Eventually you get cleanup hits and things like that. For the situation he's been in, the age, the competition, I edged slightly towards Teron Armstead.
Okay, all right. So we have the same. We just flipped it a little bit there. I think there might be a little bit of less of a debate with the other offensive line positions. It kind of seems pretty straightforward, but I'm very curious to see if you would agree. So let's flip over to right tackle. We'll knock out the offensive tackles here. First team, right tackle to me is Penei Sewell, and I don't think that there's that big of an argument against him. I'm curious if he is not your first team. And then the second team guy for me, I think there is a little bit of a debate with the second team guy. Lane Johnson, Zach Tom, Brian O'Neill. I think that you could throw Joel in there. I think that he's still a little bit further down the list, but there are a lot of guys playing really well at that right tackle spot. Ultimately, I had Penei Sewell as my first team at right tackle. I am going to keep Lane Johnson as my second team guy because I just still think that he is playing at such a high level in the way that he is playing. But who is your first and second team for the right tackle spots?
Yeah, I have it the same way, and I went back and forth until about an hour ago. I had it flipped the other way, but the thing I think that Lane Johnson's been better purely in pass pro. You isolate away from play action, straight drop backs. I think Lane Johnson is the best tackle in the NFL as just a straight up pass protector. Future Hall of Famer, just completely dominant. I think where I just edge slightly towards Sewell is in the run game, he's just a different level of player than Johnson is anyway. And then he is the feature of everything they want to do, right? They want to set up the run game. They run behind him more than anyone else. They pull him, do creative things with him. Then it's about the play action world where outside of the straight drops where I said Lane is the best, Sewell is by far the best play action protector in the league. So the way they've built their offense is around the fact that the best player we have is this right tackle. They're clubbing people week after week at this point. Offense is playing really well. Goff getting rid of the ball quickly, but so much of what they do in their offensive success is just built around the fact that the best player on their team is their right tackle now that Hutchinson's down. So I think for that alone, he just gets a slight nod for me above Lane, who I have in the second team.
1.0% pressure percentage from Lane Johnson is it's silly, man. He is one of the best offensive linemen that we've seen over the last few decades. I mean, he's one of the best offensive linemen I think that have ever played the game, to be honest with you. So let's move to left guard now. Left guard spots. I think there's, Lucas Patrick could have made this interesting if he doesn't get hurt. And I think maybe if the Saints just offensive line could have all stayed together because he was grading out really well, certainly in those first two games that we saw against the Panthers and the Cowboys, not just in run blocking, but also in pass protection as well. But, he was out of the lineup with an injury. Then there's been shuffling along the offensive line for the Saints, so it hasn't really looked the same. I think this is also kind of obvious for the left guard spot. Quentin Nelson's 1, Joe Thuney is 2. You could flip it maybe if you wanted to, but I think that these are the best two left guards in the NFL. And as much as I would like to sort of have somebody else in the conversation here, Patrick maybe could have gotten in that spot, but he's really not. I think it is Quentin Nelson from the Colts and Joe Thuney from the Kansas City Chiefs. What about you? What do you think?
Yeah, I would like to make it more interesting. I have it flipped. I have Thuney 1 because I think Nelson's had some big losses this season. He doesn't lose all that much, but when he does, they are like big, thrown onto his back in ways we've never seen before against really high-end competition, I'll say. But he's had way more Nelson on the ground plays than we've ever seen at any point in his career. So that's why I have him second. Thuney just doesn't lose it. It's that simple. You just go game by game by game, and he doesn't give up anything. He's not giving up a pressure in 3 weeks. He's only given up 7 pressures all season. So, and he's doing so, by the way, alongside what would be the sinkhole on the Chiefs' offensive line, right? So there's like the extra factor there where he's always glancing to his left to make sure everything's sound and solid and where can he help, and he's regularly moving over and shuffling across to try and get 2-for-1 blocks to help out the left tackle spot. So not only is he not losing on his own, he has a bunch of still impact plays in the run game. He's not the same kind of impact in the run game as Nelson is in terms of just like the general like blast off the ball, but in what they can do with pulling him and moving him, they get a similar type of impact on the offense as a whole. And then he has the little extra X factor of having to help out the left tackle all the time. So to me, I have Thuney on the first team, and then I have Nelson on the second team.
I think that logic makes sense. I love the way that Nelson is still commanding this offensive line despite the injuries that have happened along the interior, with Will Fries going down and Ryan Kelly being in and out of the lineup. So I give him a little bit of credit for that. But you are right. Thuney just doesn't lose. And I think a lot of coaches would say, like, dude, give me the guy who plays at a very high level who just like doesn't lose ever. So I think a lot of people would agree with you out there with you having that order. For right guard, I just mentioned Will Fries' name. I wish Will Fries from the Colts didn't get hurt because I think he'd be certainly the way that things were going for him this season. It feels like he could have been a first-team guy. Like it feels like he was having that caliber of a season with that offensive line playing as well as they were. But unfortunately, he's out. James Daniels is as well. James Daniels was playing really well for the Pittsburgh Steelers, but he's out now as well. So those two guys, not really thinking about them because of the injuries. Ultimately, I went with Chris Lindstrom getting the first team nod simply because he is that dominant of a run blocker. You talked about run blocking or impact run blocking grade, or percentage, I should say. 24.9% for Chris Lindstrom, which is just stupid. Now, James Daniels and Will Fries were also kind of at that level, and yet they were a little bit better pass protectors than Chris Lindstrom. So I think that I could have had both of those guys on the pace that they were on above Chris Lindstrom. But because they're not there, I go with Lindstrom as my first team player, and I go with Trey Smith as my second team player, although I think that Jordan Meredith from the Raiders also kind of deserves a shout out here. He's played mostly right guard, but he's also had to play left guard as well and didn't play bad at that spot either. Meredith is having a great season, but I don't think I'd be able to put him over Chris Lindstrom and Trey Smith quite yet, who I think are, as of right now, with the guys that are playing, the two best right guards in the NFL. What do you think?
I have two different guys than you.
Ooh, let's go.
This is the trickiest spot to me. I don't think that the right guard position in general is on the level of any of the other spots on the offensive line this year. I think there's players having good seasons, and there's not people having great years where there's 4 or 5 guys like we've ripped off with the left tackle spot, where it's like really, kind of picking between all-time great players here, trying to figure out who to put on. So I have Quinn Miners from the Broncos on my first team. He had a really poor first couple of weeks this season where I think he's given up 7 pressures all season, and 3 of them came in the first week and then 2 came in the second week. And since then, he has just been clean for the entire year. Now they get a bunch of schematic help with the way they run the ball and a lot of the play action work they do, but he is mauling people on the wide zone base of their offense and then on combo blocks as well. And he just hasn't lost. We go back to the Joe Tooney point. Like, give me the guy who just isn't losing, who doesn't have any kind of pressure rate. And when he's lost, there's one against Christian Wilkins in week 4 where he gets just beat completely clean. And outside of that, the guy isn't always technically brilliant, but he just finds a way to stay in front of people and to battle through reps to not give easy and clean wins. And everyone's going to lose to Christian Wilkins once in a while. Those guys are unbelievable players. That's why they get paid the way they get paid. So I've gone with Quinn Miners on my first team. And then my second team, I went with Sam Cosmi, which is a pure heart over head choice to just kind of get in there. A group we've talked about a whole bunch this season, which is the Washington Commanders offensive line. I went back and forth. Could I get Biadic in there at centers? The center got to be a bit more stacked. I thought this was a clean way of getting in someone who I think is having a tremendous season. The offensive line as a whole, we've detailed throughout this thing how well they're playing and how much they're being asked to do up front as well. And so I got Sam Cosmi on the second team.
I do love the shout outs there for both those guys. I think that Cosmi has been playing fantastic. We've highlighted how Washington, their offensive line, went into the season as a cause for concern. And now we're sitting here talking about them as a top 10 offensive line in the NFL. And I think Sam Cosmi is a big reason why. So I love that. Love the Miners shout out as well. Dude, 0.5% pressure percentage for Quinn Miners since week 5. I mean, you're right. The guy just does not get beat. He is having a fantastic season. That is a really good shout out. So I'm glad that you were able to make it. Last position that we have here is at center. It's hard for me to not go with the two very obvious players. I think Creed Humphrey is number 1 here. I think that Creed Humphrey is going to get my first team nod. Second team, I feel like there's a little bit of a debate, but for the season that Tyler Linderbaum is having, I feel like it would be disingenuous to keep him off of this list. So ultimately, I think Creed Humphrey's the best center in the NFL. I think he is still playing as the best center in the NFL. So I will go with him as the first team player. I will go with Tyler Linderbaum as my second. But I think specifically, if you want to look at even just recency, you talk about, okay, Quinn Miners, he struggled a little bit early on in the season, but really since a certain point, he's been fantastic. I feel that way about Aaron Brewer for the Miami Dolphins as well. I mean, since week 5, he has the number 1 grade for centers in the NFL with a 92.4, and so he has been fantastic for Miami. Jackson Powers-Johnson has also graded pretty well, although he has been lower in snaps because of the games that he has missed. So doesn't quite have the volume of statistics at playing at a very high level as the other two guys that I mentioned, but I'm going with Creed and Linderbaum. There is the 1 and 2, but those two guys, Jackson Powers-Johnson and specifically Aaron Brewer, I definitely wanted to shout out. What about you? Who you got?
Yeah, I have the same as you. I do think Frank Ragnow deserves a shout out too, maybe for the second team with Linderbaum. Both, again, I think Linderbaum hasn't been as dominant in pass pro this year week by week, but he still has some of the best weeks in this of any player in the league on a week-to-week basis. And then in the run game, I mean, talk about what someone is asked to do. I mean, the guy is asked to do every single thing in the world you would ask any player at any other position traditionally to do, from the pivot point, whilst also snapping the ball, being in charge of different kind of protection looks they do, particularly in the run game. He controls the run game, Lamar controls the set thing. So he's operating on kind of a different level to what just the degree of difficulty of his job is different to almost all of the centers in the league. And so for him to still produce at the level he's producing at, that's why I have him on the second team. And then Creed is just, the cleanest, best, most dominant offensive lineman playing in pro football right now. It's just remarkable. Now, he does have the help of having two unbelievable players either side of him, so that does work. But just one-on-one, he doesn't lose. And you just go rep by rep this season. Even when he loses, there was a couple of plays last night in Monday Night Football where one of the Kalijah Kancey sacks, Creed is involved in that. There's a slower developing sack also in that game. But when he loses, it's never quick. These are always either some kind of protection breakdown that happens where usually it's the right guard, Trey Smith, who doesn't quite pick something up and he has to help out. So someone comes through or gets off Creed Humphrey. Or it's just a slower developing 4-5 second type sack. So he just never loses one-on-one in a phone booth where like he had a true breakdown on his own. So just as clean as you will ever see from anyone. Obviously, he crushes people in the run game. He's got a 90% impact block rate in the run game as well. So to have someone that clean in pass pro who gives you that level of upside in the run world as well, that's why I have him on the first team.
There we go. We would love to hear from you guys as well. Mid-season, so halfway through the year, who are your first and second team all-pro players for all the positions that we listed here? You can fire off in the comments to give your opinion on that. If you don't have a PFF Plus subscription, the trenches is where we really shine for that kind of data that you guys can get your hands on. So go over to pff.com, get yourself a PFF Plus subscription, and see all of the stats that we're talking about here and more. Make sure you go follow all of Ollie's great work over at the Read Optional Substack, the Read Optional Podcast, the Audibles and Analytics Podcast with him and John Ledyard as well. For Ollie Connolly, I'm Trevor Sikkema. Thank you guys so much for watching this edition of In the Trenches here on the PFF NFL Show. We will see you guys same time next week. See you then.